Hey folks, welcome back to Inside the Numbers with the People's Pundit. I am the People's Pundit, Rich Barris. It is Thursday, April 23rd, 2020. I'm joined by Tim the Source Anderson. I'm in a great mood today, folks. We're going to do Georgia largely because we're going to stay with the theme of states that Democrats have believed they can flip. And so we're going to take a look at Georgia. We're going to run a voter analysis. The map is cooperating today, which is fantastic. And then that's what's in the news too. You have Governor Brian Kemp, who's looking to reopen the state tomorrow, taking a lot of flack from people, the media, from the left, and even from the right. Donald Trump had some comments for him yesterday publicly, and also had a conversation with him. We're going to talk about the markets and the slippery slope. Tim, the slippery slope. Guys, if you haven't read that on PPD, on People's Pundit Daily, go check out that article on the markets and oil that's up there right now. Tim, let's look at what's going on in the markets. We had the jobless claims numbers, which will hit right after the market update first. Okay. So let's, getting into that narrative we've been saying, what are the markets doing in response to these jobless claims numbers, if anything at all? What's going on out there?
I think the markets are really reacting much more in response to oil being up again today, up maybe 15%, north of $16. And we have reasonable follow through from the market averages. The Dow is up 160, 170 points. That's about 0.75%. The other major averages are up a similar amount. The breadth of the market is pretty solid. Advanced declines almost 3-to-1 positive. They were positive by just less than 2.5-to-1 yesterday. And I think one thing for the market to continue to build on the gains it's seen in the last month, and to try to wipe out the declines from Monday and Tuesday, we really need to see the breadth of the rally broaden out into not just some blue chip names and or NASDAQ, high profile NASDAQ stocks that are big beneficiaries of streaming and streaming technology.
Okay, right. So onto the initial jobless claims numbers, Tim. So you're just, you're of the similar mind that at this point, I don't want to minimize the news here. I don't, because we all know how I feel about this. But you're of the similar mind that really this is, in response to oil. I've actually heard a lot of people say that they think this is a temporary blip, a temporary reprieve for oil,
Right.
Considering, there's still structural problems out there. We have problems with storage and delivery and an ultimate problem, which is demand. There are other problems wouldn't be there if we had demand. Correct, Tim? So I'm curious to hear your thoughts.
I just think that the market's reaction to economic data and investors' reaction to individual corporate earnings always has to be looked through the prism of expectations. And the expectations for the jobs number were actually maybe a little bit higher than this. People were talking maybe another 5 million, maybe another 6 million, maybe even another 8 million. New first-time filings last week. So for it to come in at 4.4, clearly it's a terrible number, but it's not as bad as what some of the expectations were.
You know what? Let's show people that. Let's pull that up. Okay, so if you haven't seen it on People's Pundit Daily already, which I'm sure a lot of you have, let's just take a look at this chart real quick. All right. These are the jobless numbers today. So we have initial jobless claims up 4.4 million for April 18th. Interestingly, Tim, the prior week was revised down, okay, for the initial claims. So we all know what the 1 year looks like, folks. It's ugly. All right. But what Tim is talking about, the range was from about a low of 3 million. That's a really rosy outlook, if you ask me, Tim, considering the last 3 weeks. A low of 3 million was a little rosy on the spectrum for me, but that was the low end of the forecast. The high end was just under 6 million. And so we came in at about 4.4. And the last week was revised down by about 8,000. What
It's
I
pretty
don't like.
small, really,
Yeah, it's a
considering.
small number considering. I don't like anything about these numbers. I'm looking for a silver lining here, folks. And in the silver line, I can find one for you pretty simply. The last 2 weeks have been going down, Tim. The
Right.
last 2 weeks have been going down.
Right.
So, I don't know that I'm fully on board with, like, I heard Stu Varney on the way out to the office today. I'm not sure I'm fully on board with him. He said, it's exhausted. That's it. That, to me, that depends on where we go from here, of course, right? But, the bottom line is this is good as far as a trend because it looks like it's arresting, and I hope so. The 4-week moving average was about 5.8 million, just under, which is an increase. That's no surprise, Tim, since it's a moving average. An increase of 280,000 from the previous weeks, revised, and the previous week was revised down another small number, 2,000, but it's better down than up, from 5.5 million and change to 5.5 million, 2,000 less than change, right?
Right.
This is the ugly number for me, but we expected this. It does tell us something about unemployment because now we're at what? Let me go back up here. About 26 million Americans that are unemployed. Could have been 30. Again, I'm trying to find silver lining here, folks. All right. I don't like this. You all know where I stand on this. I want the economy back open. I think people are needlessly suffering. I think we overreacted. All right. But I'm trying to find some silver lining. The advanced seasonally adjusted insured unemployment rate, which is, we explained this last week, it rose to 11% and that's for April 11th. It lags. All right. This is the highest ever on record. We're way beyond the 70s recession. The previous high was recorded last week for April 4th, for the week ending April 4th. And that was 8.2. The all-time prior high to any of this, the mitigation efforts, was 7% in May of 1975, which we've discussed. Very deep recession in the 70s, Tim, right? Very, very, severe, prolonged, but deep, but structurally deep. It was a bad recession. Under the Trump administration, because this is going to get knocked into the wayside. Sadly, this is going to fall by the wayside. The insured unemployment rate had fallen to an all-time low of 1.1%. We had never seen numbers like this before, and certainly not sustained. Certainly, we have never seen a labor market so tight where we fall to 1.1%, then we tick up a little bit, a tenth of a percentage point, and hang out there since December 2018 or something. I mean, it's been at 1.2 for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks, a few times ticking back down to the all-time low to match the all-time low, 1.1. And within a matter of weeks, we've shot to 11%. So that's my hated data point in this report. But again, trying to find some silver lining. And the silver lining is that this trend appears to have arrested, right? So, Tim, I mean, what are your thoughts on this? As long as we continue to ease off these mitigation efforts and economies begin to reopen, there's almost no reason why we shouldn't be able to see a continuation of this trend. Horrible as it may be, it's at least a silver lining. What are your thoughts on that before I get into the actual
Well, I think that look, these are first time unemployment
right
filings. So you're going to get to a point either next week or the following week where everybody has already filed. They may still be unemployed, but they've already filed their first time unemployment claims. And or if they haven't, they're getting paychecks from their employer from the PPP program.
and
So,
yeah
so
oh,
this,
go ahead, go ahead.
these multi-million number weekly data points of first-time unemployment claims are going to exhaust themselves
Yeah.
and going to start coming down substantially. Now, the only thing that's going to get the unemployment rate, which hasn't even really been tabulated and released yet, to start coming down is for the economy to reopen and businesses to start calling workers back.
Right. And just for what Tim was talking about, reminded me that yesterday I actually had meant to start reading, some good comments. We got some, I try to read as many emails and as many DMs as I can, and if I read them all or answered them all, I would never get any work done. But there were some good comments, Tim, that are worth mentioning, right? So about, my wife or, or myself, I was put out in March, and now my employer got their PPP loan and I'm back on the payroll. Some people are even been given a reprieve still. So they're not really going back to work, but they know their job is there. And that's great news, right? So I mean, it shows the program is at least working as intended for some people. And I meant to read some of that yesterday. I didn't get a chance, and today is going to be another big show, and the map is cooperating. So I don't want to go back and dig them out. But the general theme was, I was laid off. I even filed. Some people did, some people didn't. The PPP loans came through, and now they have their jobs back. That's good news. I don't think, Tim and I have had this debate a lot. I don't think we're going to get out of this thing without some hurt, but it shows the program was working. It shows it's a temp. That's why though, Tim, I really think, and when you look at what Brian Kemp is facing, I really think it's better to get through these critics now, get back to work the sooner, rather than later. Nobody is forcing you to get back. Brian Kemp isn't issuing an order that says open this business or else. You can stay home if you want to stay home. But there are nearly 30 million Americans who are out of work. The PPP is floating a great deal of them, but that is not going to be able to last forever. And we can't just keep going to the printing press. Right. So I strongly disagree with what President Trump did yesterday. Strongly disagree.
Well, what did he do yesterday?
I mean, he basically said that, and then it would be fine if he just had the phone call privately, but he didn't. He had the phone call with Brian. He had a phone call with Brian Kemp, and he told Brian Kemp that he disagrees with his decision to open this early. And then, he said, whatever. Thanks, Mr. President, for your advice. I'm going to do what I'm going to do. Moving on. And that should have been it. But the media got a hold of it, asked him about it, and he just, proceeded to put Kemp down. I told him he should wait a little bit longer, and he's doing that because Trump is turning into a politician, and he's going to do what he's got to do to cover his butt. But
I think there was much more criticism on the businesses that Governor Kemp highlighted that he was reopening right out of the chute, that were very face-to-face businesses like hair salons, barber shops, tattoo parlors,
but that's not what
parlors.
Trump's talking about.
I thought it was, well, those are specifically the businesses that he mentioned when he made those comments.
Yeah, but he's talking about the general timeline, Tim. Nobody's forcing them to get back to work. You know what I'm saying?
Correct.
If you look
but
at
I think it was
numbers,
very misguided for Kemp to specifically highlight that those businesses were being reopened right away.
I see what you're saying. Okay. Yeah, that's fair enough.
Because even if you would say, look, we're not the same situation. We're clearly not New York. We're not even Virginia.
Not even close,
we don't have the outbreaks that any of these other states have. But those are the types of businesses that you would just by common sense want to reopen maybe a week or two later.
But everybody's different. My barber, it's right by the office. They want to reopen. They want to get back to work. They can wear gloves. They said they'll wear gloves and masks. So everybody, at least to give them the freedom to do so. And my point is, they have scared the hell out of so many people that these businesses are going. It's going to be like the unemployment claims report. It's going to lag. People are not going to say, oh, wouldn't you know it? Brian Kemp said we can get back to work. I'm going to race back to work now. That's not going to happen. So I think Brian Kemp I think my own personal opinion. All of these governors are sitting back like a bunch of little cowards, waiting for somebody to jump, even though we know there are many of them that want to do what Brian Kemp did, but they don't have the courage. They don't have the cojones. They're going to sit back and wait to see. This way, if Kemp fails and something happens, they can say they were smarter and didn't open up, even though we know for a fact they want to open up. They just don't have the political courage to do it. And there's a big difference there, is my point. And I think, though, the sooner we get going, the better, though, Tim, because, I mean, I don't know how it is by you, but people are afraid over here. People who are at minimal to no risk of catching this disease, they are afraid. And it's going to take time for that fear to subside. You know, it was laid on us heavy. I mean, you know, let me just spew out these numbers. And we could get back to that. I mean, might as well keep the whole segment about that. That was the plan anyway. I mean, there are governors out there. There were nearly 30 of them, Tim, that were complaining to Donald Trump. I could get back to work right now. I could get back to work right now. And nobody. And then when he lays out his 3-phase program, everybody sits back and they're all waiting to see who jumps first. I mean, it's the pit. Political cowardice is one of the most shameful things to watch and know. It's one of the worst things, one of the worst aspects for me in this business. It really is. Let's read this, though, because we have another record, and People's Pundit Daily is a data journalism site. If it's a record, it's a story, right, Tim? The advanced number for seasonally adjusted insured unemployment, which is the number, not the rate. Tim and I explained this last week. You have the rate, which is the totality, and it's very much like an unemployment rate, only we're looking at different populations. And then you have the actual number of people. And so this one was increased, but it lags. We're talking about April 11th here. And it's nearly 16 million, which is a record. It's a new record, which is an increase of 4 million from the previous week's revised average. This is the highest number in the history of the series from the Labor Department, where we knew we were going to see this because we saw the rate skyrocket so high. Claims are what they are. And while we have seen long-term unemployment, we've never seen it this quick. It's never risen this quickly. So we knew this would be the case. So the previous week was revised down to about 64,000. So that, again, adds, because this is a lagging indicator, and it lags even the initial claims that Tim was talking about. This is lags by a week. So again, silver linings. If we're headed down, we're headed in the right direction, is my point. Because again, I don't want to minimize this, but I'm looking for trends. So the 4-week average increased because it's a 4-week average. All right. So we're at nearly 9.6 million. That's an increase of about a little over 3.5 million, almost nearly half over. But the previous week, again, was revised down by 16,000. So you start to see, folks, how these numbers work. And you start to see these trends. And no state was triggered on the extended benefits program, which is always good. And you can, if you go to People's Pundit Daily, I'm not going to go through the states, Tim, but if you go to People's Pundit Daily, you can see where these claims are being hit. What we saw initially was that the initial claims were filed in states that were hit the hardest, the governors who were reacted first, and then we're now seeing these things lag and start to hurt some of the other states that weren't hit as hard. So California was among the first to act. Their numbers are not bad, but look at how many claims you have there, because eventually, the longer this goes on, the more you have supporting industries, the more supporting industries, they're already hurt, but we just haven't seen that impact yet. And then Florida, my state, is not particularly bad. And despite what you hear if you turn on the news breakdown, the local news down here, Tim, the coronavirus continues to decimate this county or that county. Decimate? I mean, the words they find, but North Carolina also really not particularly terrible, but the impact of the shutdown. Michigan in here again. because of Governor Whitmore. This is actually one of the bigger numbers for Michigan, Tim. Michigan kind of like lagged a little bit. New Jersey's in there as well. That has been, obviously, we know that is the second one. I don't want to go through the entire states. The last one I'll mention are Georgia and Ohio, because you're seeing now, why we see, Mike DeWine wants to start to reopen on May 1st. And we see Brian Kemp in Georgia, the state we're going to talk about today. Really interesting. We see those claims, those beefed up a bit there too. So, you can see where governors are trying to weigh on this, folks. They're trying to make a decision here. They're trying to find some balance, because in the beginning there was no balance, So, what do you think about that? Tim, even in the lagging, though, like I said, I'm not trying to minimize anything, but it's nice to see across the board we have downward revisions and we have decreases. It's nice. It's nice to see.
It's an initial glimmer of hope that the worst is behind us. And May 1st is basically a week from now. So you're, you could have 2 weeks from now, we could have 10 or 12 states well on their way to reopening.
Yeah. Yeah. And some big jobs numbers to follow in the months to come. So, I'm really,
but this is not, I think the big difference between what's going on now and forget about comparing it to the Great Recession for the Depression in the 30s, that went on for years.
Yeah.
But the big difference, even comparing this to the prolonged recession that it was just took forever to come out of in the late 70s. Really, it was a 73, 74 recession. Really, 74 sparked by the first oil crisis in 73. And then it came back again with another oil crisis in 79. We really didn't come out of that till the Reagan initiatives in 81. Start to come out of it in 81, 82. This is not really a structural recession. It's a self-imposed economic shutdown. So, the workers are there, the jobs are there. Yes, some of the restaurants won't be operating at 100% capacity like they were for quite a while. We don't know that sporting events are going to have full capacity fans for quite a while. We don't really know what the plan is there yet. There's different plans for different industries, for different population zones. But this is going to be what looks like a very rapid recovery, as economic recoveries from numbers this steep before have been in the past.
Yeah, and I'd point out, as you were talking and you were bringing up those dates, I was looking at the graph, and maybe I should or shouldn't pop these up, but like I said before, we have had these kinds of numbers of the actual number of long-term unemployment. We just haven't seen it that quickly. And as Tim was talking about in the 70s, with the recession in the 70s, Tim, really, there were, including the recession in the 70s, there were 3 recessions in total before the Reagan boom, which we didn't see a recession again until Herbert Walker Bush at his final, term. But if you look at the actual numbers, right, I'm talking about the labor market specifically, it didn't really tighten again from the 70s to Reagan. It didn't really tighten until the Reagan boom. It really didn't. It's like technically out of a recession, right? Because of the definition of a recession. But as far as the labor market goes, it wasn't really completely tight yet. The rate was still high and it was ticking down, but then, it would spike back up. And the number of seasonally uninsured unemployment, the number of long-term unemployed people was like still hanging out there, at pretty high. And it didn't let me just take a peek again. Not to bring it up and show people again, but it really didn't start to come back down significantly until 1984. That's when it started to come down. And again, people felt it, but it's just a totally different situation. So it is really hard, which is part of my caution. It's hard to compare it to prior recessions, that they're not really comparable because there are different reasons for them. And so it's that, but that's also why I'm like very cautious to think, about, how quickly we can bounce back. I'll get in, I'm getting a lot of questions about these polls because there's been a slew of polls that have come out. It's 5 minutes to our little break market update. I'll get into more polls and I'll get into where I think this is, where I think this is going. I was thinking, Tim, for tomorrow's show, for people who are, planning on watching or deciding, I'm gonna talk a little bit about what actually the news headlines do not determine outcomes of elections. All right. I'm going to talk about, people hear me say all the time, big pictures and fundamentals and narratives and justifications. Instead of going through a state tomorrow, Tim, I've kind of decided this morning earlier, looking at Georgia. I want to talk a little bit about that because I'm not surprised by these polls. And I know if people are going to knee-jerk want to dismiss them. Early general election polls, without getting too much in the weeds, they don't have much predictive value. That's just true. Hillary Clinton was ahead by like 20 points at this point in the Quinnipiac poll. Quinnipiac is terrible at polling Florida. Fox is one of the worst polls out there, right, Tim? I mean, we have had many of laughs on Fox polling when we, go through postmortems on these pollsters after elections to see how much we should weight them for modeling. The bottom line is, though, I would not dismiss these polls. We'll get more into this tomorrow. The big picture of this election will be it's all over the coronavirus. And if Brit Hume is right, let's say, then Trump's in a lot of trouble. And I'm talking about how he sees this thing shake up. If some other people are right, then then he'll recover by then. But presidents in bad economies take a shellacking, folks. That's the way it happens. Doesn't matter if it's paused or not. That's how it's good. People don't like to change. They don't like to rock the boat. And they don't want to change if things are going well. That's why, if I'm nothing but consistent. When Donald Trump had a great economy, he always had the advantage. Despite what the modelers, the forecasters that I'm not even going to mention them said. But when the economy gets bad, people are going to look for someone to blame. And so I wouldn't be, and especially since Biden's able to hide right now. If Biden may end up, Trump may end up being saved by Joe Biden's senility. That could be true. But for right now, they're hiding it because he's not in the press 24/7. Only thing that's in the press are the jobless numbers and the coronavirus. And you shouldn't be shocked and you should not dismiss these polls. Donald Trump was always going to have a tough reelection. But he was still the favorite in a good environment. In a bad one, he will be in deep trouble. That's it. That's history. Nobody can argue that. Nobody can find me a president who won during a recession. I dare you. Go look right now. FDR is not comparable. The Great Depression happened before FDR was elected. The economic trouble he had during that election, he was never blamed for. He was widely loved. He was beloved. Donald Trump is not. The country loved FDR. They viewed him as if we ever had a cult of personality or ever came close to a monarch or some kind of, tyrannical executive, it was FDR. Then they did it and gave it to him because they loved him. He is not beloved, but Brit Hume is a fence sitter. Brit Hume's getting to the point in his career. I saw that Brit Hume is getting to the point in his career, folks, where he's like an older statesman who just doesn't care anymore about what he says. He just comes out with it. I don't remember what I was watching. Maybe it was Martha, Tim. And I'm not really watching, but it's in the background. And I'm working, and I hear Brit Hume say Joe Biden's senile, right? And I just stop because he is senile. Maybe he's not in this is what Brit said. Maybe he's not crippling. Maybe he's not in a crippling stage of, of that disease, but we're not talking about old age here. Anybody who's known Joe Biden and has followed Joe Biden for years, Tim, you've been around a while. He was a sharp guy, very likable, never got these little bouts of whatever. And so, and that's why he's best right now to just stay off TV, really, and just hang back, right? I mean, what you know what I'm talking about. This is not a matter of Joe Biden being old and just like getting a little
No, he's
tired.
completely different. He's a completely different person
totally
than he was clearly even during the Obama administration.
Do you remember his debate with Paul Ryan? And sorry, guys, I don't usually like taking drinks, a cup of coffee in the middle of it, but do you remember his debate and how sharp he was during the debate with Paul Ryan?
Yeah.
He wiped the floor.
That was 12 years ago.
Yeah. I mean, he wiped the floor with Paul Ryan, wiped the floor with him. That Joe Biden is Joe Biden, who's been around for a long time. Right. And I will say this, when he announced and he first went out, publicly now, and everybody's like, oh, he's coming, he's going to enter the race. He was brought out of a building and walked down a ramp for, people in a wheelchair. All right. Somebody had him by each arm before the cameras got on him. And they, with minimal assistance, helped him down that ramp. He looked geriatric. He was a totally different man than the man that even, not just 12 years ago, Tim, the man who left the vice presidency a few years ago.
Yeah, it was not 12 years ago. It was 8 years ago. When
Right.
Debated Paul Ryan.
But he was not even the same man that left the vice presidency. He looked completely geriatric.
Right.
I don't say this to be mean. I'm saying what I'm telling you. I saw his head and neck, leaning forward like older, what happens when you're really old and frail, when you get old, and shuffling his feet. It looked like his head and neck were dragging the rest of his body with him. I'm not saying this to be mean. I'm trying to tell people this and then combined with his mental state, which is clear. I mean, I think it's grossly dishonest to even pretend like this man is not mentally deficient. It's incredibly dishonest. Forget about speculation. You can see you have eyes and ears, don't you? If you vote for Joe Biden, you vote for who you want to vote for, people. I'm not here to tell you how to vote. But if you vote for Joe Biden, you're not voting for Joe Biden. You're voting for Joe Biden's team around him and whoever he chooses to be vice president. Just know that, because even he doesn't believe he's going to make it to a second term. Definitely not. And many of the Democrats we speak to tell us that he is a 6 to 18 month president. That's it. That's all. And then he'll be replaced by who he picks as vice president. And I will say this. I am glad, before we go and move on to the break, Tim, my wife would never let me get exploited like that. And for everybody we talk to, you know what I mean? For everybody we talk to, they're such nice people. And Joe Biden is a nice guy. He is. I hate to tell people who hate him and want Trump to win, but he was always, at least for years, a nice guy. I'm a guy, so maybe my experience with Joe Biden would be very different than yours if you were a female. I don't know. I'm just saying, and Jill, his wife, supposed to be a very nice woman. But I know, thank God I'm married who I'm married. She would never let me get exploited like that for political or personal ambition, whatever the heck that, for whatever their motive is, Tim. I mean, after that last ABC interview with them together, where she had to repeatedly save him, he couldn't even finish a sentence. All I could think about was Laura would never let that happen to me. Yeah. She would never let that happen to me. All right, let's get into a break, and then let's hear what's going on in the markets from Tim. All right, it's 10:33 on Thursday, April 23rd. You're watching Inside the Numbers with the People's Pundit. I am the People's Pundit. Follow me on Twitter, folks, at Peoples_Pundit. And I'm joined by Tim the Source Anderson. If you haven't followed him on Twitter by now, folks, you're wrong. Check his market comments in the morning at TJ Anderson1. Follow along with him. Guys, if you're on Periscope, give us the likes, like the account, follow the account. If you watch on Facebook Live, don't forget to like the page. Give People's Pundit Daily a like. Try to boost those too, but it also lets you know when we go on live. And YouTube subscribers, again, another nice day of trend increases. Keep it up, all right? We're trying to get there. Share it with your friends and family. Do that for wherever you watch, frankly. Go ahead and give us a thumbs up on the video as well. So subscribe, give a thumbs up. And the ultimate way to support the show, which is how we bring you all these graphics, we'll show you in the next half when we get into Georgia. Subscribe to People's Pundit Daily, and you could do that by going there and finding the digital subscription link, or you could just go to ppdnews.us/subscribe. ppdnews.us/subscribe. All right. Let's go on to the market and see where the markets are going, because this report was released at 8:30. What's going on, Tim?
Markets, well, we're building on earlier gains. Averages are up close to 1.5%. The Dow's up 350 points. The Nasdaq is up. Nasdaq is up 1.5% now. The Russell 2000 is up 2%. That's something we'd like to see. We'd really like to see the Russell 2000 get above the 1250 level, 1260 level. Hold that for a couple of days, and that would show that the rally is broadening out into the smaller cap stocks. On the way down, the Russell 2000 had a much sharper decline than the larger cap averages. I think it was down 42% at its low point in the third week of March. And it has had a smaller rally off that level than some of the other big averages. So we'd really like to see a little bit of overperformance from the Russell going into the end of April. And if it got above that 1250, 1260 level, it would make us feel that the breadth in the market is improving quite a bit. Oil is helping. It's up around $17 for the June contract, and looking more and more like that Monday and Tuesday was really a capitulation sell event. But we need to get the economy turned back on to have real economic activity work off this oversupply of oil, or we'll have the same problem we had with all the storage issues when the June contract gets closer to expiring.
Yeah. So again, though, demand. And,
right.
Again, we have said this time and time again. If you turn on your television right now and you watch even Fox Business and the rest of them, they will tell you, soon they'll start attributing this to the deal, Tim. On today, the House will vote. For those who don't know, they will vote on phase 3.5 of the stimulus bill. This these are Band-Aids. We needed the PPP to be re-upped. Sure, there needed to be more money for testing. Democrats got about half what they wanted to get for hospitals. So that will be in the headlines later today. But here we are on the heels of a very bad report, or at least there were silver linings. We went over them, but the markets are not selling down. I just want to keep stressing that, Tim, because turn on CNBC, read CNN Money, and they just have this thing completely wrong. Markets are not going to be trading on data right now, not economic data. It's just not until now. If this continues and this is prolonged, then of course. But right now, I think everybody knows GDP is going to be ugly, right, Tim? I mean, everybody knows. Who doesn't know that?
It's expected,
right?
It's when we get the look, the way GDP is calculated and reported, we won't get the second quarter GDP until late July. And by that point in time, I think we'll be largely out of this. So first quarter GDP, the initial report will come. Yeah, I have to check on it, but it might come next week. And we could have, even though we were running at about plus 3%, which is a pretty good number for January and February, we might have been down 5 or 6% in March,
right?
With the 2-week shutdown. We might be plus or minus. We might be anywhere from down 2% to plus 1% for the quarter.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So it's really unfortunate that we just won't know. So let's say we get that sharp rebound. All right. We just are not going to know before that election. That's why I say people have to.
Rich, I'll be right back.
Okay. That's why I say people have to feel it all the time. Guys, I will send it out in a second. People want YouTube links. Tim's off. Now's a good time to send it. I just sent it to everywhere. All right. Yeah. But people have to feel that. And it gets back to what I was saying before. And Tim disagrees, but I'm telling you, and I would challenge you all. If you think I'm kidding, I'm not kidding. General election polls that are early, no predictive value, very little. And I even, last time in 2016, I even got into that I think the election result proved I was right, even leading up until, a lot of us like to say Labor Day. That's when people start to pay attention. And that's true. But there have been instances of when the leading candidate, even weeks after Labor Day, has not won the election. So general election polls at this point, they're just not the media. There's things we can derive from polling at this point, the national mood, what people are most concerned about. But if the media ever even touches on things that are worthy of asking, they never ask them the right way. And they certainly don't do it in a granular enough study, a granular enough fashion, which to make it worthwhile. And the reason why they don't do that is because of money. So campaigns, they want to win. If they're a well-funded campaign, they will do that because they spend their money on that. A media poll, live caller media poll, maybe their budget's $20,000 and they don't want to spend any more than that. So they'll ask their 20 to 40 questions and that'll be it. So you'll never get anything from a media poll that really, not never, but it's rare. It's very rare. And, the bottom line is that's not what big media's motive is, where the campaign's motive is to spend money and get as granular data as they can. The big media outlet, they want a headline. They don't care. They cover, and this is a big problem with how media covers elections. They cover horse races. They don't cover details and fundamentals. They don't care about that. It doesn't get clicks. It doesn't sell subscriptions. It's not their business model. Whereas a campaign, they will pay the money if they're well funded, and they will, in 2014, that's a great election cycle to prove my point as well. Sent a lot of very competitive Senate races. It was a very right map for the Republican Party. They were not leading their Democratic challengers until after Labor Day, and it wasn't even that close. A lot of the polls were wrong. But the bottom line is, in what we were doing, which we reported on People's Pundit Daily, if you were to poll Ernst against her Democratic incumbent challenger in Iowa in 2014, maybe the Democrat incumbent would have a few point edge, but you would look in, and what's a good question I can, basically to emphasize my point here. You could say, do you want a Republican Senate or a Democratic Senate? Meanwhile, you have a chunk of the electorate, maybe undecided. And you look at those undecideds and you'll say, well, they prefer a Republican controlled Senate. So you're looking at a wealth of a vote that's not showing up for Joni Ernst right now. Do you want your senator who represents your state to be for or against stricter gun laws? Things like that. And then, of course, you get deeper into it. But those are just touching on the surface. But you'll never really see the media ask those questions. And when they do, by the way, which I'm going to get into tomorrow too, about polling, it's how it's done. The order in which questions are asked, the design of the survey itself can greatly impact the results of that survey. So if you ask people, do you like how Donald Trump tweets every day? Do you like how controversial Donald Trump is on Twitter? And then 2 questions later, you go, do you approve or disapprove of the job Donald Trump is doing as president? You have tainted that survey. Like a first-year student knows that. And they do it. They do it all the time. So tell me, with nothing from APOR, by the way, with no response from APOR, which if people don't know is American Association of Public Opinion Research. People like to, follow APOR guideline. They should, everybody, even though whether they're a member or not, everyone should follow APOR's guidelines. If you release a survey, where's your checklist? Where's your transparency initiative checklist? Where did you pull that data from? And you just won't get it. You won't get it. So transparency is a big issue, but it's also a matter of how they're doing these surveys. But I don't want to give in too much of tomorrow's show, so I'm gonna move on here to the next segment. Well, what we were just basically talking about, Tim, was how the polls right now, early general election polls. Stacy, no, I didn't go over it yet. We're going to get to it in the next. I'll usually take almost an hour to do these. So in about 15 minutes, we're going to hit that. I just answered that question because it's the second time she asked. But we were talking about general election polls, just the predictive value of general election polls. And there is no predictive value of this early. There isn't. And anything that's worthy of trying to ask, media just doesn't ask them. That's what we were talking when you were gone, just to fill you in. I mean, they don't. And I think part of that, Tim, is that it's not their business model. They cover elections like horse races, right?
Right.
They just cover the horse race.
Right.
They don't care about, the actual fundamentals of the race. They don't ever ask anything worthwhile. And no, it doesn't really matter. I wouldn't dismiss the findings of the polls today, but if you know me, and Tim does, Fox is like one of my least favorite pollsters. They are not good at all. They're not the same that they were during 2012, 14. They have a different polling firm. They used to have what was his name? Anderson, and starts with an R. I forgot his name. But basically one Democratic pollster who used to poll, I believe, for John Kerry, and then another Republican pollster who was like Karl Rove's buddy, I think, right, Tim, or something.
Right.
But I liked the setup because I liked the idea of a Republican and a Democratic pollster coming together to do a media poll. I like that a lot. I would partner with. I mean, I think I'm considered right wing, obviously. Even though I don't, Tim will tell you I consider myself down the middle. I think they're just so left wing that they call people like me right wing because they're so far to the left. But I would partner with a liberal in a heartbeat because that lends credibility. The New York Times, I think it was Nate Cohen, did an amazing article in 2016 because he was actually finding a much closer race, even though his modeling was horrible. He was finding a much closer race in some of these states. And he did I think it was him, but it was the New York Times. They did a great article, Tim, about here is a CSV, a data set of responses. Let's give them the 4 or 5 different pollsters and just the responses. And let's see what they do with those raw responses, what result they would come up with if they were running the poll. And it was amazing. I mean, it was everything from Trump +1 to Clinton +7 or something, because it does matter what you do with those raw responses. And he was proving a point. It was a good point. So that's why I liked the way Fox did it in the beginning. Anderson is not going to take that data set and do the same thing, that his partner would have done. So it was nice to get some kind of consensus there between the left and the right on how to handle this data set. And it's amazing. You could give 4 or 5 pollsters the same raw result, and they will give you a very different weighted result to hand to their client or hand to a media outlet that hired them to do it. And that's unfortunate. There should be more co-ops like that. But now it's not. It's just at Fox. It's just a left-wing pollster. And it's not good. I mean, Indiana was horrible. I mean, really, Tim.
But I thought they made that switch after 2018.
I thought it was right before. I could be wrong. But Indiana was absolutely abysmal. It was Donnelly. Joe Donnelly was going to beat Mike Braun by 7 points. It was
right. Their Missouri poll wasn't very good either.
It was tied.
It was the state polls. It was the state polls that they really, really struggle with.
And I wrote in a column for Rasmussen Reports, and I'll link that after the show, that went over this. The media, they took their result from 2018 because they largely did project a national Democrat mood. And, their House vote, for instance, was everything from Democrat +5 to Democrat +12 something. Democrats wound up winning by, 8 or 9 when all the votes were counted nationally. But they took those results and they used them to kind of like shift the narrative that we fixed the problems that happened in 2016, and you can trust us going into the next presidential election. That was the goal. And it's just not true. It's not true. If you look at the state polls, they were horrible. And I wrote a column for Rasmussen Reports. You know, you just can't argue. You can pretend, you know, and you can go on TV and you can pretend. But if you look at their actual results, everything from the NBC Marist poll, the state level polling was not good.
So Fox's last poll had Trump and Biden tied after having shown Biden to have a 7 or 8 point lead for 2 or 3 or 4 polls.
Yeah. And now, though, they released some battlegrounds. They released some battlegrounds today. Biden's ahead. Pennsylvania, Michigan, and then there were also polls from Reuters. Biden by 3 in Wisconsin, by like 8 in Michigan,
right.
You know, 6 in Pennsylvania. It could be, you know, around that ballpark. I think, look, at this point, Biden is benefiting from not being in the public eye. And, you know, and then also with that Fox.
Almost like you're running against a generic candidate.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And there are so many people who don't really like Donald Trump that he gets there's like that certain base he's going to start with. But that poll with Biden and Trump tied, that national poll a couple weeks ago, was really screwy, Tim, because presidents who have a 49% approval rating do not get 49% of the vote, and definitely not a president like Donald Trump. If you're at 49%, you're going to win.
Right.
So I think they're doing something very, very funny. I really do. I mean, that's just me. And you know, I'm not a conspiracy theorist. Not. But there are indefensible things that I've seen. You know, it's almost like they want to give Trump the impression that people like this shutdown. I hate to say that, because I was always a big believer in averages before RCP was cool. I always believed in averages, never dismissed polling. Didn't in 2012. I did not think that the polls were skewed and we had to unskew the polls. I thought Mitt Romney was going to lose. I do not, you know, have a history of some of this like stuff. But after 2016, I sadly think that there's some things that I can't explain, Tim. You know, and I have emails that I think people might find interesting. Maybe I'll get them and put them up on the show tomorrow. You know, interest from 2016, you know, emails from someone who worked at Google Consumer Surveys who told me that their surveys were just too pro-Trump, so they pulled the plug on them, you know, and that, right. You know, hang in there. I got an email from a high-level person at Nielsen telling me that they think Trump is going to win, you know, and that to hang in there, be strong, because he could imagine the pressure on me to herd like to the rest of the pollsters must have been very intense. And it was. Right. It was. I'm telling you, I was like, I'm either right or I'm finished. I'm done. You know, so the pressure is immense. And then when you get hired by a big media company, which I've never polled for like NBC or something, but they you know what it was never like this, but you know they want you to find the result that they want, you know? I mean, it's just that's why I don't like to poll for super PACs, by the way. You know, never like to make that a habit, because super PACs tend to want a narrative, and they're not really looking like a campaign is looking, or at least a realistic one. They'll come to you and they'll say, am I down or not? What do I need to do? You know, help me out here. And they want you to be truthful with them. They don't want you to blow smoke up their butt. Are we up? Are we down? Do they want something that they could put on a press release to put out? Like, I'm up a couple points. Give me some more money. Of course. But if they're down, they want to know they're down, and they want to know where they're down to go and campaign, right? But a super PAC's not like that. Media now is becoming like a super PAC, you know, where they want it for narrative. They don't want it for the purpose of telling people what is the real status of the race. It's sad, man. It's sad. And there's a lot of pressure. And, you know, even public pollsters who aren't attached to media outlets, folks, they get calls from politicians and their assistants all the time. All the time. And We saw your polling the other day, blah, 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 blah. It happens all the time. And then some revel in it, unfortunately. And there's some of the big media's favorite pollsters who love all the attention, Tim. And we all know those people who I'm talking about. They love it. They want to be the one Politico calls every day about the new poll. And they love giving their little quotes, and they don't care whether they're wrong or not. They don't care. They just want to be that pollster. It's just not what it used to be. It's really sad. So the point of this is when it comes to media polling, I'm all in favor of like a bipartisan media poll. I am all in favor of that. And I'm not talking about I would have liked, the Fox model. That early model was cool, but wouldn't it be nice, Tim, to see like Roe or like Remington Research, which we know is pretty darn accurate. And I think they changed their name now, but they did well in 2016. They didn't get very much credit. I'm not talking about like Karl Rove's buddy, some establishment guy who is buddies with Mitt Romney, or Mitt Romney is used. I'm talking about a real Republican activist pollster, like somebody like Remington Research. And they partner with one of the, like a Richard Hart. Richard Hart polls for NBC, Tim, but then gets hired by Democratic presidential candidates. I would never do that. I don't understand why that is just okay. Boy, I'm going to take some flack for this segment. I'll tell you right now, naming this man. But you should not be allowed to, not that, it's America. You should be allowed to do what you want. But people should say, this firm polled for NBC, did a poll for NBC News. Here's our latest poll results. It was conducted by Company ABC. Company ABC also works for candidate A. You know what I'm saying? Like, that shouldn't be known. It shouldn't just be all right. It really shouldn't. I mean, maybe I'm an idealist or something here, Tim. What do you think? Maybe I don't know. What do you think?
I just think it depends on what disclosures you give and what your what your history is. If you're polling for a national media organization and your results are embarrassing, you're not going to get hired by a lot of people outside of that universe. Right. Yeah, because the campaigns aren't going, the ones who want people to be realistic with them, they're not going to chase down those people. So again, though, too, that also in some strange way gives them an incentive to continue to give the media outlets the results they want, whether they're accurate or not. It's crazy. It's crazy. And then the industry doesn't like to evolve because they make the most money, the gold standard, live caller, gold standard polls. They also just happen to be, I could show you they're not the gold standard, but they also happen to be the most expensive. I think the gold standard in my mind is mixed mode, because different voters respond to different modes at different rates. You're just not going to talk to a lot of conservative women in rural America calling them on the cell phone, Tim. They're not going to pick up their phone, and if they do, the response rates are so very terrible. Then you're dealing with bias, inherent bias that become artifacts of the poll, and then it's just a number of things. And then that mode is particularly susceptible to participation bias. And what I mean by that is Access Hollywood, for instance, right? People who supported Trump after that tape did not want to talk. They didn't. They just flatly didn't want to pick up the phone anymore. They knew it was bad and they didn't want to talk. And same thing with Obama's supporters after Mitt Romney's first debate. He bloodied Barack Obama in that first debate. It wasn't that people were no longer supporting Barack Obama. They just didn't pick up the phone. So Mitt Romney took the lead for a while. And you can see that in the representation of partisans. So it's that's response bias. So in my mind, and what I have long been advocating for, is mixed mode surveys are the gold standard, because you reach a more accurate, more representative sample than if you just use one collection mode. They all have their own biases. But if you were to talk to big media, they'll tell you
that online is, has their own bias. Well, so they just pretend like cell phone collection doesn't. Of course it does. It's nuts. Wow, we're at 11 o'clock already. And somebody said Fox has James down to Peters by 10, but you should expect that. So if Trump is down to Biden by like 8 in Michigan or something, you would expect a similar result. I mean, it would tell what they're trying to say is, and I haven't had a chance to really look in the poll, so I really can't speak on it. But what they're trying to say is it's going to be a bad year for Republicans in that state. That's what they're trying to say. But again, early general election polls, don't dismiss them, but they're not predictive at this point. And they have very little predictive value. All right, it is 11 o'clock. You're on Thursday, April 23rd. You're watching, and when we come back, we're going to do Georgia. You're watching Inside the Numbers with the People's Pundit. I am the People's Pundit, Rich Barish. You guys can follow me on Twitter at Peoples_Pundit. I'm joined by Tim the Source Anderson. You can follow him, guys, at TJ Anderson1 on Twitter. All right, and he is going to give us a market update here just in a second. Just let me remind you. Go ahead, if you are on YouTube, go ahead and subscribe to the YouTube channel. Don't forget to give us a thumbs up on Facebook Live. You viewers, if you haven't liked the page yet, go ahead and like the page so you can get notified when we go live. All right, Tim, what's going on out there, buddy?
We're pretty much where we were 10 o'clock, 10:30. The Dow is up about 1.4%. It's up 325 points. It had been up a little bit more than that 15 to 20 minutes ago. The S&P is up a similar amount, 1.25%, trading at about 28.35. I like to see it above the 2800 level. And the NASDAQ is up just less than 1.5%. I just think that if the market were to tread water from here to the close and hold most of these gains, it would be a very constructive 2 days back to back after what we had on Monday and Tuesday.
All right, sorry for that delayed response. I'm trying to let people know we're doing Georgia. Yeah, so I may have glitched out myself there, but markets are up. We just, not 3 hours ago, had that report. I'm sorry to keep beating a dead horse here, folks, but I'm always trying to prove the point that media oversimplifies narratives. If we were trading on economic data, we would be down. Did we give up anything, Tim? Anything at all from looking at when I'm sure you were looking at the futures markets this morning? Did you see any, and even a temporary reaction to that report at all?
The markets rallied on that report a little bit, frankly, because the consensus was even a little bit higher.
Right.
So the markets did not, the markets moved a little bit higher from 8:30 to 8:45, 9 o'clock after that report came out.
Yeah. So
it's an expectations. It's all about expectations. It's like that with economic data. It's like that with company earnings. A number of the corporate earnings that have come out this week, they have not been good, and the stocks have acted quite well in response.
Right.
Because maybe they weren't as bad as people might have been anticipating, and almost a reverse sell on the news reaction. You have a buy on the news reaction to people that were like, well, I want to buy this stock, but I don't want to buy it until the earnings come out, because when the earnings come out, then the stock might go down 5 or 10%. And then that doesn't happen. And then they're like, well, I'm not going to get the opportunity that I was hoping for. And there probably were 1,000 other people looking for the same thing. And then you have a reaction.
Right.
I mean, I've said it numerous times. The stock market is the greatest single predictive indicator that we've always had. That's one reason I think that we're going to economically come out of this in a lot better shape than what a lot of people have been talking about. And, you're seeing some, not apocalyptic scenarios with some of these corporate earnings reports so far.
Right.
And by the way, the first look at Q1 GDP will be next Wednesday morning.
Okay.
Wednesday morning.
Okay. All right, folks. So let's get into Georgia. A word on Georgia before I start. Okay. This is keeping up with our theme toward the end of the week, throughout really this week. States, we went through traditional battlegrounds. We went through the states where if Biden was to beat Trump, he could end the night early. Now we're on states where, because we also went through states where I just don't think they are competitive, and I mean that in favor of Trump. I don't, the map shifts, the electoral map changes, and now we are in. And some of the news moved this. It really went well. Who released polling? I mean, it really worked out well. We are continuing the trend of states that Democrats think they can flip. And we did Arizona. We did Texas yesterday. Now we are on Georgia. A word on Georgia. There are a few things that I have got to talk about. All right. And I'm going to pop up Georgia here now. There is no such thing as voter suppression in Georgia. Okay. The Stacey Abrams excuse for why she lost is false. It is phony. It is a myth. I will give you some background on both elections, and then we're going to talk about why Georgia can be close, as we saw in the gubernatorial election last cycle, but how different it is on a presidential level, even though the electorates were very similar in terms of population. I will say this while we talk about Georgia real quick and the voter suppression. Stacey Abrams in 2014 convinced a lot of, starting in 2014, here's the backstory, convinced a lot of people with a lot of money on the left that she could flip the state of Georgia using voter registration drives, that there was an untapped huge wealth of African-American support. There were black voters that were not on the rolls or being suppressed from the rolls from voting, and that if they gave her enough money, that she could beef up the rolls enough where they could flip the state of Georgia. All right. Georgia's voter rolls is a focus of controversy. She accused Kemp, while he was Secretary of State, she accused Kemp of purging the rolls. The rolls in Georgia are still dirty. They are still kind of dirty. And I'm going to show you right now. They're very different. The overall, a lot like Texas, the overall rolls do not look like what an electorate looks like. They're more Democratic than you'd think. But in the end, it was just not true. The independents are not as liberal. They're not as liberal as it's the South, even with the growth in the Atlanta area and their surrounding suburbs. They're just not as liberal. And her beef was never with Brian Kemp. I just want to clear some of this stuff up first, Tim, because it's just totally ignorant to how elections are conducted in the state of Georgia, or even in Florida. We've heard similar arguments. Her beef with these rolls, and there's a law to clean these rolls. Her beef was with individual supervisors of elections. In every county has one. And her problem were in blue counties. So her beef was with liberals who were following the law in those counties. The Secretary of State does not handle or purge the rolls. I mean, they relied to make this case. They relied very heavily on their base's ignorance to how elections are conducted, and the media's either lack of.
And she knows that too. So she was basically just lying. They were basically just telling lies and getting the media to repeat the lies.
That's exactly right. And the media knows better as well. Elizabeth Warren.
And the most of the media knows it's a lie also.
Yeah, they do. That's right. Some of them are just lazy, like we've spoken about, Tim. Political reporters are lazy. They're not particularly smart. They're definitely not as smart as they think they are. But some of them do know this. And I know people who know this, yet even go on networks like Fox News and regurgitate it, even though they know this is a lie. Okay? If anything, Tim, these rolls are still dirty and need to be purged more, because there are a ton of dead people. There are a ton of recent movers. But let's just go and let's cast that wide net. All right. And then let's look at the entire electorate, the voter propensity score. We're going to look at 2016 versus 2018. I want you guys to keep your eye on the total number of votes, the electorate. And I'm actually going to show you, I think you're going to be shocked because it was closer in Georgia for Brian Kemp than it was for Donald Trump. Yet Brian Kemp carried counties that Donald Trump didn't carry. All right. And on the vote suppression idea, there have been study after study from Stanford to even the National Economic Council, National Bureau of Economic Research, Tim.
Yep.
There's been wealth of data on this. Voter ID laws and these voter roll cleaning laws, they do not reduce turnout among minorities. They don't. In fact, turnout in Georgia is a great example of how that is total bunk. She is a gaslighter. That is it. African-American turnout has steadily increased at higher paces than most other races. So she's just a liar. It's that simple. All right, let's check out the voter roll, though. Here's the map. It's cooperating today, folks. Hurrah. You can obviously see DeKalb, Fulton. That was the subject of a very tight race for Newt Gingrich's old seat, was represented by the former Secretary of Health and Human Services, Dr. Price. And then it went Democratic after Karen Handel was elected in the special election against, what was his name? Started with an O. He threw more money at that race than God. Democrats eventually took it, though, in 2018. I'll tell you what, Tim, I saw revisions to those reporting APIs. I've been doing this a while. I have never seen precincts take back their entire vote report.
That was a stolen election.
I mean, I've never seen that in my life. Karen Handel was up. Fulton decides, you know what, we're just wrong. Those, you know what, forget about all those reporting numbers. And then they come back with thousands. And that, I mean, maybe there was something fishy. Maybe there wasn't. But I am leaning toward Tim's point of view because I have never seen that happen in my life. Never. And it happened in a lot of places in 2018, folks, by the way. I'm talking about whole precincts just deciding I made egregious, huge errors. Forget about what I reported before. And here's our new totals. And it was nuts. It was nuts. And you would have to assume that all of the new votes that they found and adjusted, of course, did not follow the trend of the previous vote and were heavily, heavily slanted toward the Democratic candidate. All right, so let's go back here. Now we threw this giant net, and we're going to run our analysis: party, gender, household income, marital status, ethnicity, education, religion. All right, this is everybody. And again, I'm going to tell you the vote totals in 16 and 18. We're looking at just under 3 million votes. That is this right here. This is about how many people voted. And this is the big net, folks. This is everybody in the file. That's about how many people voted in 2018. I'm not even kidding. Kemp had just under 2 million votes, or 1.8, Tim, I think it was. Stacey Abrams had, I think it was 1.8, and change, but it was about what, 40,000 votes, I want to say. I just looked at it before the segment, but we were talking, but that is a hard chunk to make up in a state like Georgia, because there are just not too many more places where you can find them when you're a Democrat. And we're going to show you that. There are lots of votes from Democratic counties that come in, and then you'd be shocked to see the rest of the state is just pretty handily Republican. So you have two real large Democratic vote centers, and then the rest, with the exception of small pockets here and there, are Republicans. So if the Democrat is trailing by tens of thousands of votes, their vote reports are in 90% or greater. It's very hard for them to make up that margin, and that's what happened to her. So we're looking, though, when we have the entire, it's about it's about R+4, Georgia. When we have the entire electorate, this is as good as it's going to get for a Democrat. They are not going to get any better. It's unless Democrats vote in an election and Republicans don't. That is where it would need to be in Georgia for Democrats to undo that starting base edge. About 3 in 10 voters are not unknown. The model is not able to peg what they are as partisans, which means they're unaffiliated. Okay, that's a big vote share. They do vote differently in presidential elections. I want to say this again. I want to say this and stress it. In presidential elections, this vote is more Republican. Donald Trump did much better with this vote than Brian Kemp did. Yet, Brian Kemp carried counties, areas that Donald Trump did not. And yet, Donald Trump's margin was bigger. It's because Donald Trump squeezed out more votes out of that group. And even though he may have lost some of the smaller counties, it didn't matter because it's about vote share of the overall electorate. Where is it coming from? Gender, about 53% women, very close to the national average. And then let's just go down to race. And when we do this, Tim, like right now, there's a big unknown for marriage, but when it's about 32% marriage for the base, wait until we add the voter propensity score, which I'm going to be favorable to Democrats on. And there's a reason why. I'm going to show you still how much that doesn't really matter. There's a big African-American vote in the state of Georgia, a very big one. Whites are more, than that. There's little unknown, not much. Small vote share of Hispanics, all that's been growing. But whites will be about, 60 and change. They vote heavily Republican. Black voters do vote heavily Democrat, of course. But Georgia is a state where Republicans can actually do better than the national vote among Black voters in certain elections. And that's important to watch because let's say some of these polls are right and Donald Trump's support among Black voters turns out to be higher than it was in 2016. And he increases it from 8% nationally. A state like North Carolina, a state like Georgia, a state, where's another good one, Tim? Ohio. That's where we're going to, and Florida, by the way, that is where we will see that vote bear out, where he'll get creamed in some of the other ones, maybe get 2 to 4%. But in certain states, that is where if he's going to increase his total percent of the Black vote, those are a few states where you're going to see that lead the national average. Okay. All right. So you get an overall picture of the electorate. You got a pretty good idea. One more thing I'll say is religion. It's even with the full file, it's still 54% Protestant. Those of you who know, have been watching, know that is the strongest group for Republicans as far as religion goes. There's a big Protestant Black vote as well, which is part of the reason why Republican candidates do sometimes outperform the national average in Georgia. Catholic, a lot smaller than a lot of some of the other southern states, like what we went over in North Carolina. All right. And even, we didn't get there yet. Never mind. I don't want to blow away. Let's do the vote propensity score before we look at the map. Actually, let's look at the map before I change that to what it will, because this map will change when the voter propensity score comes in. Take a look at that map. Okay, guys. And now let's look at Trump v. Clinton. Okay. See that map? That's Trump v. Clinton. See it there? Obviously, I'm trying to overlap to show you a little bit. But here is the Democrats' base of support. This is where they will get the most votes out of the state. And you can see that. They did that. I'm going to overlap it again. And then you can see that eastern region near Savannah. That is Trump's that's Trump's map. Keep an eye on the eastern part of the state when I show you Brian Kemp's map. Okay? Because even though Brian Kemp won by a smaller margin in the eastern part of the state, he did better than Donald Trump. Okay, which is pretty interesting. But Richmond, Columbia, all around there, you'll see those are one of those pockets that I was telling you about. And then Savannah down over here, Chatham, right? Or Chatham, that they'll say whatever. And then, of course, you have the southeastern part of the state, which is right around over here, what you're seeing on your map now. Let me get rid of that so people can see again, overlap it. here in Savannah, folks, down here in the southeastern region. There's pockets by Richmond. And then this is the big gold mine for Democrats. If Stacey Abrams had an argument, right, we would see Donald Trump do poorly over here. I mean, better than Brian Kemp over here. All right. And because, right, Tim? I mean, if she had an argument, we would see a reduction in the black vote share in these Democratic strongholds, especially during something like a midterm election. But we didn't see that. Here's Brian Kemp's map. Brian Kemp actually carried right around. See how much better he did around Richmond? Look at how much better he did.
Yep.
Donald Trump lost those three counties over there, but Kemp at least claimed one. The map is lighter blue during Kemp's in some of the areas where Donald Trump lost. The map is lighter blue in some of those areas where it's darker blue. And here's important to remember. Here is Trump. Watch Atlanta, folks. Let me get rid of the map and show everybody where Atlanta is again. Okay? Watch this region of the state right here. Here is Donald Trump. All right? Here is Brian Kemp. What do you notice happened there? Brian Kemp lost larger vote shares. Here's Donald Trump. It's much lighter. Here's Brian Kemp. Even though Kemp carried some of these counties over here, all around Baldwin, he did better than Donald Trump there. Here's Trump again. Watch that center of the state to the east, and that from the central part of the state to the east. Kemp carried them, but he did worse in Atlanta and around Atlanta, high African American areas than Donald Trump did. If Stacey Abrams wasn't a liar, and she is, all right, if she wasn't a liar, that would have remained pink. I mean, light blue. And those areas that you saw in the central part of the state to the east would not have moved from light blue to light red, pinkish, because Brian Kemp carried them. All right, folks. Again, Donald Trump. And you can see a lot of areas there. Hillary Clinton did a lot better than even, some other statewide Democratic candidates in the past. She did very well, but she didn't come as close as Stacey Abrams did to beating Brian Kemp. But that is because she increased her vote share among African American areas, and she increased the total votes that came out of them. It was just about as many votes we have never seen a presidential election, a midterm election come anywhere near a presidential election as far as turnout in the state of Georgia. We just have not seen that. Brian Kemp it was actually 1.9, folks. Brian Kemp got just under 2 million votes. He got 1,978,000 and change. 1,978,000. Stacey Abrams got 1,923,000. Hillary Clinton only got 1,877,000. Just under 100, just under 1.88, really, basically. And Donald Trump got a little over 2 million votes, almost 21, so almost 2.1, million. He got 2,089,104, even though, I'm going to stress it because I'm going to say this 8 ways from Sunday, even though Donald Trump lost the central to central eastern part of the state, he still got more votes than Brian Kemp, because Stacey Abrams was able to increase where the Democratic stronghold's vote share is. Now, she just couldn't hold on to certain counties. She couldn't hold on to Burke. She didn't do as well in Jefferson. All the way through Hancock and Putnam, all the way into Jasper, she did not do as good as Hillary Clinton did. There's Hillary Clinton. She couldn't do that. What she did do, and that's because she was much, wouldn't you agree, Tim? She was much more to the left of Hillary Clinton.
Oh, yes.
I'm over sucking on my Nicorette, folks. So, it's Nicorette time. I did almost an hour, more than an hour without it, right? she was much more to the left than Hillary Clinton. So she's not going to perform as well among, I want to say, moderate independents. All right. Maybe even mild. Let's stick to moderate. The more central you get, Tim, then the more the less moderate they become, the more conservative socially they become.
Yeah.
She'll tell you it's about race. That's the way these, there's a certain segment. And if I sound mad here, it's because I do. I am. This is unproductive to have this conversation. Look at the map. You did not lose because there was some kind of suppressive effort in Atlanta. Look at that. She did about as good as a Democrat can do. That is deep blue there, Tim. And then in and around affluent white suburbs, she increased her vote share. So much for racism, so much for voter suppression. She simply lost because Georgia is a very hard state for Democrats to win. Let me get rid of the map. Let's look at why. All right. Let's add you looked at the whole electorate as a whole. Okay. Let's look at the voter propensity score. I'm going to be nice to Democrats. I usually, you know what? We got time. I'll do 50 first, and then I'll even reduce it for them. Okay. But here is what would typically be. Here's what would be a typical midterm electorate. I hit back. That's all right. Let's look first at what would be a typical midterm electorate, very much more close to what we saw in 2010, 2014. Okay. Pull it back up. It's not that big of a state, so this will not take very long. A mess up like that with a state like Texas would have taken forever. But this is not that big. We're only talking about a few million votes. Run the count. Unique individuals, about 3 million emails. So it's still going to be a nice chunk. We're only excluding deceased and change of address flags as usual. Okay. We're looking at about 2.4 million people, which I wish I could almost live interact with you guys. What that should tell you is voter turnout's pretty good in a state like this. Voters vote. And that's because of how Republican it is when you do give this, when you give them the, the voter propensity score. Look at what happens to Democrats simply when we just say, is it a greater than 50-50 chance that this voter will vote? If it's less than 50-50, take them out of the database. The independent vote gets cut in half. The Republican vote soars almost to the majority already. And Democrats remain, they get a little bit, but it doesn't matter when Republicans shoot up so high. Now we're looking at like a Senator Perdue kind of margin. All right. Which would make sense because we're talking about a tighter screen electorate. Let's be nicer to Democrats. Okay. And actually, I'll show you that map before we get even nicer to Democrats. It's 1128. So we'll be nicer to Democrats on the flip side of the quick update. We'll be nicer to them, and we will look at a 30% chance. So let's give them a 30% if it's greater than 30%. So we're going to loosen up the screen, and we're going to include lower propensity voters to give Democrats not quite the entire electorate, every single person on the voter roll, but we're going to give them a much more liberal electorate. And I'm going to show you what that does. So again, just from this, we're looking at 1.1 and a half million Republican votes, 920,000 Democrat, and the inferred independent, the truly independent, falls considerably. Democrats need to run that margin up with them in an area like this, because if it's not fresh in your mind, folks, what happened here is this remained, of course, their stronghold, but Republicans started squeezing in and around this place. If you don't remember the map we had before, the blue it expanded, it had a larger reach. And then in a place like Savannah, down here in Savannah, those voters, if they're more higher propensity voters, I think we all know, get a picture in your mind of the Republican voter from Savannah, a female Republican voter in Savannah, but like a wealthy female Republican voter in Savannah, they'll go out and vote. So Savannah starts to all of a sudden become a lot less rich. Richmond, still very blue. But then in and around these areas, you can see how Brian Kemp really did have a shot here in and around this state, in and around this area of the state. And then, of course, you're going to have your Democratic strongholds over here. But you can see why Brian Kemp did much better in this area. When it's a presidential election, there will be more votes, even though it wasn't that many more votes. There will be more votes. And, Donald Trump or a presidential candidate will do worse in this area. And, it was light blue throughout these three counties over here. And of course, the fourth I'm not including because that is a Democratic county. But Brian Kemp was able to swing a lot of that area, even though he lost, even though he won by a much more narrow margin. All right. When we come back, we'll give Democrats a 30% propensity score. All right. So what we're saying with that is it's not more than a 50-50. It's really, we're going to give them low propensity voters. If they have low propensity voters, what is the base edge? All right. When we looked at it with the whole, it was about R+4. The minute we gave them the 50-50 shot, it became overwhelmingly almost R+10. All right. Which is why we have seen margins close. It's like a David Perdue-like margin. All right. And when we come back, we'll give them 30%. And let's see, it'll be obviously somewhere in the middle, in the ballpark of in the middle. But we'll do that when we come back from this hot minute break. All right, folks, it's 11:31 on Thursday, April 23rd. You're watching Inside the Numbers with the People's Pundit. I am the People's Pundit, Rich Barris. Follow me on Twitter if you don't already, at Peoples_Pundit. I'm joined by Tim the Source Anderson. Follow him on Twitter, folks, at TJ Anderson1. If you are following along on YouTube, don't forget to give us a thumbs up on the video and subscribe if you don't subscribe already to the YouTube channel. Same thing with Facebook. If you're a Facebook Live viewer, if you like the page, it will alert you when we are going live, which is Monday through Friday, 10 to noon Eastern Standard Time. And ultimately, if you want to support the show, how we bring you these databases of millions of voters like this, then you can subscribe to PPD, and you can do that by going to ppdnews.us/subscribe, ppdnews.us/subscribe, or just go to People's Pundit Daily and you'll find the subscriptions there. We're going to take a quick look at the markets. When we come back, we're going to give Democrats a much more favorable electorate in Georgia and see where this shakes out for them. What's going on out there, Tim?
Well, we're pretty much where we were. The Dow is up a little over 300 points. That's between 1.25% and 1.5%. NASDAQ and S&P have similar gains. The Russell is outperforming. I think that's a positive sign. It's up 2.25%. And also another positive sign is that the breadth of the rally is continuing to improve. About a half an hour into the day, the advanced declines were positive by 2-1. They are now positive by like 3.5-1. That's much better than they were yesterday when they finished the day positive by like 2.4-1. So look, we're going to bounce around, I think, between now and the close, with the Dow up, between 1 and 1.5%. But if we hold a good chunk of these gains and the breadth of the rally stays about where it is, I think that'll be a very positive sign.
Right. That's good stuff. Tim, before we move on real quick back to Georgia, there was one I wanted to, the Atlanta Fed. So it was like -0.3% for
Q1
at Q1. Yeah. So, I mean, you brought that up before and there was like a quick question on it. Where do you think the Atlanta Fed comes down on this? Do you think they're close, roughly close, or sometimes they're bullish?
I try to avoid watching their projections until very late in the quarter, until you get very close to where the number is going to come out. And that is a week from now. And we are close to that. So that kind of fits into my wide range of anywhere from plus 1% to -2%. I probably think we're not going to hit +1%. That's just too much. We declined very, very, very sharply in the last 2 weeks of March. So they're basically flat. They're basically saying flat. I don't have an issue with that. I mean, I think that it's very hard to project. And they have a history of after some wild swings during their early projections in a quarter, being within 0.5% correct. Maybe you got to widen that out a little bit this time because we're just in unprecedented times. The one thing that I do think is whatever the number comes in at, when we get the initial revision at the end of May, my bet would be that initial revision takes it lower, just because most of the raw data that will come in from the initial revision will be in the second half of March.
Right. I could see that for sure. And I would note, before we jump back into Georgia, I would note that we got a little bit spoiled under Donald Trump. A couple of years of GDP data we got under Barack Obama. That first quarter was his weakest all the time. That's historical. That's traditional. It was his weak quarter. Several times under Barack Obama's 2 terms, we saw that first quarter go negative, only to bounce back strongly in the second. So we got a little bit of an uphill climb. It doesn't necessarily mean that we were headed into a recession like a lot of people thought we were, even if the first quarter was going to go negative. The second quarter, minus the COVID mitigation efforts, could have still been a strong quarter. And all indications with the housing market and the labor market were suggesting that we would have. So I'm just of note there for historical perspective, folks. First quarter was always like that giveaway quarter, Tim, right? Like almost like a giveaway.
But we were bucking that trend very significantly both last year.
That's right.
And also this year, because we were tracking at about +3% January and February. That's what's really going to hold up the Q1 GDP. Because if you're running at +3% for January and +3% for February, you've got to be at -6% for March to come in at 0.
That's right. Yeah, a good point. And we were bucking that trend. That's under Trump. That's what I meant. We got
that's why I feel there's an outside shot that this first report could be just marginally positive.
A beat. Yep. Yeah. All right. And by the way, the trade deficit was headed in the trade deficits slice off of GDP. It was headed in the right.
And that's a larger
big
proponent for GDP than most people realize.
All right. 11:37. Let's jump back into Georgia. All great points. Let's give Democrats, let's loosen up the likely voter. Okay. Every pollster is different, and they'll have to decide whether or not they want to include some of these people in their likely voter models or not. All right. My own personal opinion, I like to check whether the voter is lying to me. Every time I pull their information from the voter file, I will cross that with their ID, their respondent ID or their API ID, which is assigned to every single record in the voter file. If they are lying, I will know they are lying. All right. And sometimes, I've said this before, you will see a person who will tell you that most of the time it doesn't happen in the reverse. It can, but it's more lopsided that someone will say that they are not going to vote. And then it's at least when you give them a likelihood spectrum, which we do, they may fall 50 or below. But then I go and I check on Dolores in Savannah. And Dolores has voted in every single election since she was 18 years old. So Dolores is lying to me, and I know she's going to vote. She's just not particularly enthusiastic to do it. So it all depends on whether it depends on the pollster and their likely voter model. Let's look at a 30% likelihood. All right. And when I'll try to leave some time, I won't try. I will leave some time to get to some questions. I see 2, questions and points really. That I want to address because they go hand in hand with what I was talking about. Always great questions from you guys. All right, what am I doing here? Voter propensity scores at or above 30%. Instead of it being a greater than 50-50 chance that they will vote, it is now 30%. Traditionally, this helps Democrats. The lower you go, the more it will help Democrats. When we cast the very big net and we included everybody, we were looking at about R+4. When we included 50%, we were looking at about R+9. Let's go with 30. Let's re-update. It's going to run its count again. All right, we're over, 3.6 and change. All right, and that, again, if it doesn't think it can do it, it won't include them. It doesn't mean the electorate will be that. But we're looking now generally at a fairly close electorate to what we've seen over the last few years. Let's run it again. Refresh. Party, gender, household income, marital status, ethnicity, education, religion, the defaults. It's going to go through its thing. Here we go. Did Democrats get helped very much from going down to a 30% likelihood? I mean, you guys can answer that question yourself. Republicans came down a tick, few points. They were just running up on the majority before when we gave it a 50-50. They were at about 48%. Now they're about 46.8. Democrats, I want you to take notice of something. This is, again, for people who are just jumping on. This is the state of Georgia. They haven't moved much at all, have they? Right? The only difference here is the share of the base advantage for Republicans. They are really the only ones moving. Democrats haven't come up since we gave them the tightest screen. It was R+4 with everybody involved. Democrats have not come up or down since we went to 50, now to 30. They've generally hung around in the same area. It's Republicans who are going up or a little bit less. They pull back 2 points here. That is a very strong indication that a party has a significant base advantage, a significant party affiliation advantage. And you'll notice, just take note real quick here of the independent. We're talking about like now truly independent voters. We loosened it up a little bit. So it went from a third to 18%. Now we're down, if we were to round up to 15, because 0.2 of a percentage point would round up to 0.5. 0.5 would round up to 1 as a whole number. So we're looking at about, 15%. Go back and look at the exit polls. They swing. They just didn't swing enough for Stacey Abrams to undo her lack of base advantage. Let's look at a few more components before we move on to the map, all right, to further destroy, and then I will answer some of the questions, to further destroy this idea that there is voter suppression in the state of Georgia. And that is what is costing Democrats these elections. What's costing them the election is that there are a lot more Republicans in the state of Georgia, even though Democrats have made gains. And Democrats have not yet been able to win the independent vote by a high enough margin to offset that like R+4 deficit, even in the best election for them, even in the sweetest electorate. They would need Republicans to stay home. That's it. They would need Republicans to stay home while they go out and vote, and then they have to win the independent vote. All right? I'm not saying it's impossible. Of course it's not. Look, Doug Jones won Alabama. I'm just trying to tell you, during a presidential election, we're going to see a return to the mean. That happens a lot. States can swing during midterms, back and forth, but they tend to return to their party. They tend to revert to their PVI, is my point. All right. You'll notice, even though we dropped it a little, females are now just about 56%. The overall electorate was very close to a general national census weight. Again, if you give, it doesn't necessarily follow that the higher, the female vote share is, the more Democratic the electorate will be. This is a lot more to consider that jump between bases. Democrats really haven't moved. Just Republicans came down a tick. It's much more detailed than what you'll hear on media and some of this other punditry. Well, where are these females coming from? Are we talking about an increase in the female vote in Atlanta or the surrounding suburbs, out to the east in Savannah, the Southwest? It's like we're just talking about Democratic strongholds here. Where are they coming from? Maybe that's how Brian Kemp was able to flip some of those areas. So maybe it's not true. Maybe it doesn't necessarily follow that the more female the electorate is, nationally applies to every single state. It's just not, that's just not true. It's not. So, and a state like Florida, again, bears that out. All right. Ethnicity, it's generally true nationally, but it isn't when you get state, the presidential election is won in the electoral college. It's not won at the national level. All right. So again, African Americans remain about 3/10. What we've seen here, and I don't know if I really spent a lot of time on it before, what you would have saw is whites shoot up in the 50% propensity score, meaning voter is more than it is more than 50% chance that the voter will vote. You'll see, whites become about 66, even as high sometimes 67%. We took that back down to 30% now. So whites fell to about 65%. All right. That's more than the entire electorate when we plotted out before without any likely voter screen, and where they were a little right around 60%. And then Hispanics, again, not much movement there, not much movement for Asians. African Americans ticked a little bit higher than they were before, but it shows you that there is a ceiling here. There is a ceiling, and they haven't been able to break through that ceiling. And that's why you're really not going to see us move Georgia to a toss-up. It's not really a toss-up yet. In a horrible election, all right, let me throw my caveat in here. In a horrible election in which Donald Trump is thumped, could Georgia become a battleground? Yeah, I guess. But in a horrible election, Brian Kemp still won. Right, Tim? I mean, 2018 was not a good national mood for Democrats. And he won.
Yeah, and he got outspent just vastly, enormously, and they pulled out all the stops with to try to win that.
Right.
And are still in denial that they really didn't lose it.
I think we blew a huge hole in her, and I'm going to look at the map again, but we've been through 2 maps now from the voter files, 2 maps from the results from 16 and 18 to compare. I think this next map is just going to reinforce that. I know it is. It's just going to reinforce it. We blew a very big hole, and that bigger than a hole. It is not true. It's not true. And it is extremely irresponsible for any political figure, anyone really, the media, extremely irresponsible to tell a group of voters, a race of people, that they are somehow being suppressed. It is false. It's false. It does nothing but hurt the national unity. You can't win an election with the country feeling like we're all, we all have an equal shake here. All our votes matter. If you can't win an election without doing that, then you really need to ask yourself whether you're a positive political force in the nation. And the same goes for both, I'm just saying this is Georgia, so we're obviously talking about Democrats here. But, I mean, the fact of the matter is it is simply not true. This now overwhelmingly supports. There have been studies. I'm not talking about from the Heritage Foundation, Tim, Stanford. I think Yale did one too. I mean, it's just false. And I would note before we jump off and look at the map, Protestant share of the electorate here has now ticked up to 64%. We didn't look at that before with the 50-50, but it would have been around 67, just to tell you. And it, we loosened the voter screen here. So now it ticked down to 64%. What's important here, why I'm making it, hay out of this, is because you didn't see the African-American vote go up that much, right? They basically hung about steady, and you saw the white vote share go up when we started putting on these likely voter screens. Now we've loosened it. If this is very good for Republicans, is my point. It is their strongest faith. And there are a lot of African-American, especially in the South, a lot of African-American Protestant churches. If this wasn't something, so, Republicans wouldn't view them as vote rich, but because the share of the electorate, the black electorate, didn't really move, the increase in this Protestant vote is more like Dolores and Savannah, right? And that's my point, that those are Republican voters. Not all of them, of course, but the increase shows that those are increases in Republican-rich targets. Let's look at the map. Like I was talking about with Tim before, this map's going to confirm what the other maps confirmed. Savannah got significantly less blue. Look at that now, Tim, in Effingham. Chatham is really the only remaining blob, of blue. Even Harris now to the west, out to the west, folks. Even Harris now, this western part of the state can be vote rich for Democrats. You have Richmond, even look at where Columbia comes down. Richmond, where all this blue is. Look at how speckled it's now become with red. I'm trying to talk in terms of, just visually here. That's why I like graphics. It's as a way to illustrate things that words cannot. This blob before was blue, and now you can see the red speckle in. So when we look back at those maps, just to pop them up again, let's take a look back at the actual results of the map. Here's Donald Trump. Look at, that's that blue area. It's light blue. And now here's Brian Kemp. He carried that area. Well, now we know why, right? So they have even a modest tightening of the likely voter screen. Even a modest tightening will cost them counties that they may not typically lose. Hillary Clinton had a bigger electorate, so she had a better chance at making that area, that area over here. While that's up there, I can show you. See where I'm circling, right? She had a better chance to reinforce the Democratic vote in that area, and she did. But even a modest tightening, and they had very high turnout in 2018. Even a modest tightening of the likely voter model will cost the Democrats that area. All right, folks. But what happened here when I moved this back and forth again? Look at Atlanta, because the Stacey Abrams thing, I hate it. It makes me so angry because it just does nothing but cause division. It is not true. There's Hillary Clinton. Look at Atlanta. There's Stacey Abrams. Stacey Abrams lost by a smaller, more narrow margin than Hillary Clinton, even though she lost other counties that Donald Trump was not able to carry against Hillary Clinton. There is Hillary Clinton. There is Stacey Abrams. Why did she get closer? Because she ran up the vote in Democratic African-American communities. End of story. Mic drop. All right. Let's take a look at some of these comments because, man, let's answer some questions because I can't tell you how much that gets under my skin. All right. There was one really good one for a second. Where is it? Yeah, it goes back to Stacey Abrams's beef, Tim, with Brian Kemp supported it. Here's Jimmy. Boom. Okay. Wouldn't Atlanta and rural black majority precincts be chaired by Democrats? If so, why would they suppress their own vote? Hogwash. Jimmy, excellent. That is exactly right. Her beef was never with Brian Kemp in the Secretary of State's office. Her beef with those who are supervisors of elections in those counties. And guess what? They're Democrats. Because that is where she's saying these votes were purged. African Americans were purged. There was a suppression of their vote. The vote went up there. Those are Democrats who run the rolls over there. They're just complying with the law. But guess what? As good old Brenda Snipes in Florida shows you, you can get around that compliance, right? So that's exactly right. That is exactly right. Yes, Nicorette, still a thing. They're lozenges. I never did like the gum. But yeah, there was some other really, good points here, Tim. But how do you,
you got a couple questions in there about the Loeffler Collins Democratic primary race. which, I mean, look, Biden's already won the national. They've delayed that primary to June 9th.
And it doesn't
Biden's
really
clearly
matter.
going to be the Democratic nominee. We know Trump's going to be the Republican nominee. What's the turnout going to be in that primary for the Republican Senate race?
That's a really good question. So far, we have seen the disproportionate impact of fear from contracting coronavirus, from casting ballots disproportionately hurt Republicans. I think there's a pretty good case to make about that now, even though we're not talking about huge numbers. We are talking about on the margins. I think, just from private polling, I can tell you that Collins had a sizable, not insurmountable lead of about 7 to 9 points until the insider trading story came out, Tim, at which point he began to crush her. And I mean, it was like 2-1 at one point. I don't know. It probably came back down to planet Earth by now. But I think it's fair to say I would really love to see some recent polling there. But it's, from both sides of this, Loeffler and Collins, it looked like Collins, was building a very sizable lead. Now, the National Republican Senatorial Committee, folks, is mad at Doug Collins. They don't want this at all. Brian Kemp appointed Loeffler. Her husband, we have a couple minutes here, but if Tim was still sitting there, I would have told her husband is the man at the FEC. At the New York Stock Exchange. So, it looks horrible. It looks horrible. And this is not the state to be doing that. The state, the base, the Republican Party never wanted Kelly. They wanted Doug. And I think she's in deep trouble, So that's really it. Like Tim was saying, though, their whole beef was that it could cost Republicans a congressional district. It puts that at risk. It puts a Senate race at risk. I just gave you the numbers. You decide whether or not you think it really does. If Republicans are in a position where they're going to lose a Senate seat in Georgia, it didn't mean because Doug Collins put them there. It means that we're going to have a very bad year. David Perdue, if everybody remembers, in 2014 was running against Michelle Nunn. Her father was an extremely well-liked Democrat, long, deep history in the state of Georgia, a conservative history. They
should have run for president.
Really? Yeah. That popular, folks, in a deep red state at the time, and or a deeply conservative state at the time. And David Perdue dispatched Michelle Nunn by 9 points. Okay. She was very strong, a very strong candidate. You even had a couple kind of Atlanta Constitutional Journal polls, which I will caution you guys about. I don't like criticizing pollsters. That is one I will tell you to take with a grain of salt. They did this last time. They did this with David Perdue. Michelle Nunn could have eked out a win over David Perdue. And then Hillary Clinton was looking like she was going to flip the state of Georgia by 2 points. It's so close. We saw it in 2018 again. Take their polling with a grain of salt. And Georgia, by the way, is not that easy to poll, and it's been changing. So even pollsters who have had a good grip on Georgia are having a difficult time doing so right now. So that was Stacey's question. That was a good question. I think right now it's clear Collins' advantage. Clear. Another one is about white educated suburban votes in Georgia. They are different. So when you're talking about the Atlanta suburbs, you'll see Stacey Abrams obviously increased the vote share out of even those suburbs from Hillary Clinton. One more time. Let me take away that map over there. Let me remove that map. And then real quick, because we only got like 2 minutes, but I have time to get it back on the screen real fast. Here's Trump. Atlanta's in the northern central part of the state, for those who don't know. Here's Trump versus Clinton. And there's Abrams. Abrams not only squeezed out more vote out of Atlanta, the actual urban area, but she did better than Mrs. Clinton in the surrounding suburbs. There were also several voters missing out of that equation. So the question in 2020 will be, is it enough? Well, not is it enough. Will it stay that way, or will it go back to light blue? All right. Will Trump, win back some of that suburban vote? Because they're not, there was just a matter, Tim, of about 40,000, 30,000 votes that didn't show up there, so we'll see. And even if it holds, this is my point, folks, again, real quick, because we got 1 minute. Even if it holds, it's not enough. Even if that trend holds, is my point. All right. So great questions as always, guys. Tomorrow we are going to do, of course, our usual hour, and we're going to do something a little bit different on, instead of the voter analysis. We're going to talk a great deal about polling and the questions that I get all the time. So we're going to actually get into it. I'll show you some tools. It'll be fun, So it is another day in the books, Tim. Another good one. Thursday, April 23rd. Folks, if you guys aren't following Tim on Twitter, do so at TJ Anderson1 on Twitter. All right. So you're watching Inside the Numbers with the People's Pundit. I am the People's Pundit, Rich Barris at People's_Pundit. We'll be back tomorrow, folks, at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Don't forget, wherever you guys are watching, subscribe to the YouTube page, give a like to the Facebook page, all the hearts, all the, bells and whistles that come with those, and follow the accounts so they notify you when we're going to go live. And the ultimate way, if you want to support the show, see it expand, subscribe to PPD. That is how we bring you all these databases and graphics. All right. And you could do that by going to People's Pundit Daily, or you could go to ppdnews.us/subscribe. That is the short link. So until tomorrow, folks, all the best. Thanks for joining us. And I can't wait until 10 a.m. tomorrow.